What's up guys? Welcome to Motocross Action's 2022 Yamaha YZ450F tested video. In this video, we're gonna break down all that we know about the 2022 YZ450F. We're gonna be riding it today here at Glen Helen. It's our dirt dyno. We know every bike and how it feels on this track. So I'm excited to get out there, break this bike down for you guys. The update list is pretty small for the new year on the YZ450F. It's got a lighter rear hub. It's also got a lighter rear sprocket, a lighter chain, updated graphics, and updated suspension settings. So there's a few changes that are gonna tweak this bike, and I'm excited to see how it feels on the track. We know a lot about this model, so we've been riding it over the years and it hasn't changed too much. So excited to share all we know in this video. All right guys, a long day of testing here at Glen Helen, our dirt dyno, and it was a good one. The Yamaha YZ450F for 2022 didn't get a long list of upgrades as we already mentioned, but it did get some significant upgrades back in 2020. That's when this bike wasn't maybe all new, but the updates were definitely significant. It got updated cams, connecting rod, combustion chamber and valve angle, head height, compression ratio, and head pipe diameter were all changed inside the engine for 2020. So that was a significant change in the power band for this bike. Also, as far as the chassis and the suspension, the frame wall thickness got increased, and also the motor mounts and head stays changed a lot in 2020. So 2020 was a big year for the Yamaha 450. 21, the bike was exactly the same. This year it has that updated rear wheel where it's a little bit lighter. It's got some updated suspension settings this year as well, where it's a little more firm, holding up a little bit better in the forks and the shock. So it's not a whole lot different than it was last year. But the Yamaha is a very particular machine. A lot of people complained about it in years prior. It got a lot better in 2020, but even the 2020 and 21 seasons, even the factory 450 Yamaha riders were complaining about this bike and the handling of it. There's lots of bad feedback coming from guys like Barsha and Plessinger. Now for 2022, the Star Racing Yamaha team took over the 450 program and turned this thing around. They've really figured out a lot of things with the Yamaha 450. There's a lot of things that they do differently than what you get on your production model, but they're really proving that this bike has a solid platform and it can do well at the races. Talking first about the suspension on the YZ450, Yamaha is always praised for having amazing suspension. The KYB SSS forks, a huge groundbreaking technology when they were introduced years and years ago. Now they're still at the top of the class, and we put them up against the WP Air forks as battling for the best forks in the class. One interesting thing to note about the Yamaha suspension and the Yamaha forks is that Yamaha has continued with coil spring forks all the way up until 2022, and they never went away from that coil spring to air forks, unlike Honda, Kawasaki, and Suzuki that all messed with KYB and Showa air forks, and unfortunately they were a huge failure. They weren't a success, especially at the production level. A lot of people didn't like them and put a lot of bad tastes in people's mouths about air forks. Yamaha continued with the coil spring forks even though they tested it. Talked to Travis Preston today. He said that they did test air forks, but they ultimately stuck with the coil spring forks, and they've made up ground, and they're definitely the best coil spring forks on the market. So as for suspension today, we ran the sag at 105. That's where we started out with the YZ450F, and I liked it. I honestly didn't make one clicker adjustment, left the sag where it was, and I was very impressed. There wasn't, maybe it wasn't the perfect setting for me, but I was pretty happy with stock. Couldn't think of anything else to make it better. So overall suspension settings on these bikes are pretty impressive. One funny thing to note, a little insider tip, is that the Star Racing Yamaha 250 and 450 teams are actually running air forks. So it kind of is up to rider preference where they have full air forks or they have hybrid air and spring forks for some of their 250 and 450 riders. That's kind of funny because Yamaha doesn't sell air forks, but then their factory guys run it, where KTM, they sell air forks on their production models, but then their factory guys run coil spring forks. So just something interesting to note. Building off of the suspension going into the chassis about the YZ450F, as mentioned, the frame was updated back in 2020 when this bike really changed. The front end was actually softened to become more flexible on the front part of the frame, but then the rear part of the frame and the subframe were made to be a little bit stiffer back in 2020. So this, for the MXA Wrecking Crew, was a positive thing. It made the bike feel more racy and overall made the bike feel more predictable and maybe quicker at turn-in and it was easier to initiate a corner, where a flexible chassis that flexes more will be more plush, more comfortable going over bumps and stuff like that, but it will be a little bit less predictable coming into corners. So we've done a lot of different tests with engine mounts. Stiffer makes the bike turn sharper, softer makes it more plush and a little bit more comfortable. So there's lots of different ways to change the bikes, but it seems like the trend for 450 and 250F motorcycles right now is to go with stiffer chassis. KTM made their chassis a lot stiffer in 2019. Honda made their chassis a lot stiffer in 2021. And Yamaha made it a little bit stiffer in 2020, which gave us what we have now. So talking to Daryl Eklund, the managing editor of MXA, me and him were talking back and forth today. He said back in 2019, the chassis was a lot more flexible and it was more like a couch. You kind of where it had a little bit less precision coming into corners, but a lot more flex and a lot more sometimes comfort on that chassis, where this is more of a race ready and more aggressive frame. Next subject, the engine on the YZ450F is kind of a puzzle piece that's hard to figure out. It's super aggressive right at the crack of the throttle off idle, but then it kind of mellows out after that to where, and then it really starts making big power in the high RPMs up above 9,000 RPM. So it's interesting, talking with some of the other test riders we had riding the bike today. It feels so fast on the track. It's just incredible how it lights up coming out of corners. And looking at dyno charts on this engine from last year and just comparing this bike to some of the other bikes, you feel that it's aggressive right at the crack of the throttle, which really gives you that exciting feel that you know when you know you're on a 450 with this one. It's no slouch. Then it's funny how it kind of mellows out after that and then really picks up as a high RPM engine. So we call it a strong high RPM engine disguised as a mid to low RPM engine. Kind of takes a little bit of time to wrap your mind around because it feels so strong right at the crack of the throttle, but then really picks up later in the race. Comparing the Yamaha 450 power band to some of the other models, the Honda is definitely more mellow off the bottom end, especially in 2021. It copied the KTM engine that's a lot more mellow off the bottom end and really builds its power on the high RPMs. Kawasaki, it also has a quick revving and kind of snappy feel like the Yamaha, but that bike is so low on power that it's a lot more mellow all the way through the power. So the Yamaha, quick revving, high RPMs, it makes a lot of power, where the other models, they aren't as exciting to ride and they don't feel as fast, but sometimes that slower power and slower building power actually makes it easier to ride too. So there's lots of pros and cons that go back and forth there. As for the mapping on the YZ450F, there's a map button on the handlebars that allows you to switch between stock and your second map. You also have the Yamaha Power Tuner app that you can download for free on your smartphone, Wi-Fi connect to your Yamaha to check hours it has on the bike, and also adjust the maps from there. So you can download maps off the Yamaha website, so you can have the maps that they recommend, like TP3, Travis Preston 3, Travis Preston 5, or GC5, which is what I like today. It's Good Control 5. That one kind of smoothed out the power, broadened the range, and made it a little bit easier to ride on the track. So some of the other models like Kawasaki and KTM, those bikes, you notice a big difference when you're talking about mapping, but with Yamaha, it's a little bit harder to notice a big difference there. One thing I do like about Yamaha is that you can click the button and change between maps, but when you buy the bike at your dealer, you won't have two maps in it. You'll have to download the Yamaha Power Tuner app to be able to find a different map on the track. So for me, as a test rider, I like going back and forth between the two maps while I'm riding. With Honda, you have to put the bike in neutral to change maps. With KTM, you can change it on the fly easily. With Kawasaki, you have to pull off the track, plug in a new coupler, and do a lot more maintenance to get a new map in your bike. So overall, not a lot to complain about with the Yamaha Power Tuner app. It's easy to use. You can custom make your own map and download Yamaha maps as well. Talking about the air filter on the Yamaha, it comes right up in front of the seat, right where you sit. So the gas cap is hidden, it's underneath the seat. The air filter is right in front of that. This comes with the backwards engine design and the forward intake that they have on the Yamaha. The air filter is pretty thin and it's pretty small. We've sucked a lot of dirt into our Yamaha engines through this air filter, and there's a couple fixes that we have with that coming from Twin Air. Twin Air makes two different options that help out the Yamaha air filter design. They have one filter that has a thicker foam with also a top hat style spacer that lifts the Twin Air filter off the backfire screen, so that creates a little bit of space in there, and it helps when the engine is sucking air through the air filter, but it's not going to suck as much dirt through there. Twin Air also has a power flow kit that has a new sealing ring, a taller cage, and a dome shaped air filter. It doubles the airflow and it also prevents dirt from getting inside. So Twinner has two great options for your Yamaha air filter. As for the ergonomics on the YZ450F, it's definitely my least favorite bike in the ergonomics department. And the chassis and the radiators and the shrouds are super wide. Also has the foot pegs are a little bit closer to the seat, so that's kind of a plus and minus. The closer foot pegs to the seat makes the cockpit a little bit tighter, which is tough for a guy like me, 6 foot tall, but also better for a guy that might be a little bit shorter. This year and last year as well, the top triple clamp has 4 different positions that you can mount your handlebars in, so there's a lot of room for adjustability up there. There's 2 holes and the bar mounts can be moved forward and backward to change the range and adjust where the handlebars are on the top triple clamp. So the bike comes stock with the bar mounts in the forward hole facing backwards. To move it 16.5 millimeters closer to you, you can put it in the back hole facing forward. So it's quite a big adjustment. The bike came stock. To me, it felt super wide. That the handlebars brought me riding a little bit farther forward in the cockpit. That pushed my legs further out, and I didn't really like it. So I brought the bars back to the second hole, pushed the bar mounts forward, and that was where my sweet spot was today. And it's also where the MXA Wrecking Crew feels most comfortable on this bike. Diving into some of the specs on the YZ450, the price comes in at $9,599. As for peak horsepower, this bike hits 58.56 horsepower. Peak torque number comes in at 34.36. As for the weight, it weighs 238 pounds, and the sprocket ratio for 2022 is a 1349 gearing ratio. So let's dive into some of the pros and cons about the YZ450F. Starting off with the pros, first, suspension. Man, this bike is plush. It's planted and very confidence inspiring. For me, the easiest way to tell if a bike is handling well is if I think about turning and it turns, and if I can trust and have confidence in the tires that they're not going to skip out, they're not going to push, I'm not going to miss a turn or anything like that. So suspension, the KYB SSS coil spring forks and the suspension on the YZ450 are very great. I'm also putting the engine in the pros list because it has so much power, and it's easy to take a bike with a lot of power and detune it with gearing and mapping and different things like that. It'd be easier to slow it down to make it easier to ride than it would be to take a slow engine and make it faster. Also, this bike is versatile. I was talking with Daryl and Ezra and some of the other test riders here. The Yamaha is easy to ride for a pro rider and for a beginner rider, a bike that anybody can hop on and have fun with. Also, durability. This bike is the strongest in class. We've put lots of hours on Yamahas, and they are by far the most durable with the least amount of issues on the track. Another pro is the Yamaha Power Tuner app. It's easy to use, and although it's not my favorite thing to be sitting on my phone adjusting my motorcycle, it is something that is getting more and more comfortable for riders at the track. I'm getting more and more used to it over the years as I get comfortable with Yamaha and get comfortable with the app, so that is definitely under the pro list. Diving into the con list, the ergonomics are definitely low on the totem pole for me. It's wide, it's bulky, and it's heavy. As for the foot pegs being closer to the seat, I mentioned that it's great for shorter riders, but for me it makes me feel a little bit cramped. Air filter, there's not a lot of room in there, but it is easier to make the bike a lot faster. You see the Yamaha factory guys, the Star Racing team, have new air filter covers that allow a lot more air to come in. We've tested Slater skins and a bunch of other air filter covers for the Yamaha 450 that definitely improve power. Another con, it has to be the weight. This bike weighing in at 238 pounds is 15 pounds above the KTM 450, and you definitely feel that on the track. The MXA Wrecking Crew has test riders on both sides of the fence. We have guys that love this bike. We have guys that have a really hard challenge riding this bike. So it's a little bit in between for the MXA Wrecking Crew. Hope this video helped you guys understand a little bit more about the YZ450. We're going to continue putting time on this, and we have lots of articles about this bike on our website. We got the full test of last year's 2021 model. We're also going to have a full test of this model, the 2022 YZ450F, in the future issue of Motocross Action magazine and on the website soon. So thank you guys for tuning in. As always, check out motocrossactionmag.com for the latest news, reviews, race results, bike tests, product tests, and more. We're always updating our website with lots of stuff. And subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date with our latest videos, so we got a lot more coming there.